Okay, so you have a concept for a new story. Maybe it's a book, maybe it's a script. You have the concept, it sounds good in your head, but now you got to populate it with characters. So how do you create the new characters that fill in the spots that you need in your story? There's a few ways, and I want to go over a couple of them. Some people will write entire backstories for their characters. I mean, whole biographies, favorite foods, pastimes. They write every single thing that they can think of. They try to flesh out the entire character, their whole life, everything about them, and they'll write pages and pages about each character just to get an idea who they are. Other people go the opposite direction. They'll write almost nothing. They kind of keep it superficial. They'll just put the basics of the character, the only thing they need for the story, and that's all we delve into. We don't delve into their backstory. We don't delve into their favorite color and stuff like that. Their family history, unless the family comes up in the story, and then they make it up kind of as they need it or as they go along. Both of these methods are equally good, but they both have their drawbacks and their pros and their cons. You can write the entire backstory, their whole life, their biography. The pros of that are you've got all the information there. Everything's there. You've probably got a good idea of who that character is, and you can pull from that created biography already. It could save time in the future. You're doing all the effort up front, and then when you need it, you can just pull it. The cons are it does take longer to do. Most of that information will never come up in the story. So you're creating way more information about a character than you need to. More importantly, you can get stuck on those characteristics and wanting to include them somehow. You want it to mean something because you've created this character, they feel real to you, and you may get stuck on character aspects and personality traits that really don't add to the story and that readers may not find interesting. It may make them more well-rounded, it may make them more realistic, but you're including it just because it exists in your headcanon and not in, it just doesn't need to be in the story. The other con, is that if something happens in the story, particularly if you're doing a series, if you're doing a TV show, it can cause problems with continuity if you later decide you want to change it and do something different. Maybe in the first book you said that they don't have any brothers or sisters, they're an only child. But then by the time you get to the third, fourth book, it would make a better story if the person was a middle child or had a younger brother or something. And then you kind of wrote yourself into a corner because you've already mentioned things that didn't necessarily need to be mentioned just because you had them. Now, to go to the opposite side of the spectrum, some people just make it up as they go along and they just do what's needed for the story. The pros of that are you can change it anytime. You can be flexible. You didn't need a brother or sister in book one or the chapter one. Well, now you can add them later on because you didn't write them out. You didn't paint yourself into that corner. It doesn't, you're spending less time up front. You can get right into the writing. You don't have to create huge backstories for every character that you need. The cons of this are you're creating tropey or stereotypical characters often. You're fitting characters that are archetypes for the type of story that you're creating, and you're plopping them into your story, but they're pretty much similar to the same characters of other stories of your genre. The wizard, the reluctant hero, the evil, sorcerer or something, if it's a fantasy book. Things like that, they're tropey. The hard-boiled detective. You're writing that kind of story, so it's easy to draw on these caricatures or these stereotypes. And sometimes this can be a good thing because sometimes an audience is expecting that caricature. If I go to see a detective noir, movie, I want to see a Sam Spade. I want to see a guy like that. That doesn't mean you can't make them specific and make them unique through other characteristics. So you can pull from stereotypes, but you don't want to be tropey. You don't want to be, the same as everybody else. You want to stand out. And that's one of the problems with just creating it as you go along to fit the story, is you usually end up with a generic character and a generic story. We've talked about adding way too much detail that you don't need. It takes more time, and it can get you going off on roads that your story doesn't need to go. And we've talked about not having enough info to where everything sounds bland. So how do we get it into the middle? Now, I can only speak from personal experience, and this is a method I've used, and it actually worked out really well for me. As you may or may not know, I've written 3 self-published fantasy fiction novels in the Legend of Levnar series. It's a fantasy story that, I mean, book 1, I wrote several different versions of, called Falling Rain, and it's a story that I've had in my head since I was basically a teenager, since like 13 or 14, and I wrote it 3 or 4 different ways. I knew the characters inside and out. The only thing that changed was their names. I had very basic, generic names in the beginning, and I had a publisher suggest some things. I ended up not going with that publisher, but their critiques were accurate and good advice, so I did take their advice. And so I didn't really have a problem with the characters of the first book. I had plenty of time to mull it over. As I got further into the series, however, I started having issues. Second book in the series, titled Thrown into Flame, when I had to write that was basically a mystery about them trying to solve, who's committing these attacks, this murder, basically these murders before an all-out civil war erupts between the 2 races, the humans and the Talame, which are a bat, a humanoid bat race that lives on the island. So they're trying to solve this murder, find out who's behind these. Is it political? Is it racial? What is it? And so I kind of knew the character types that I was going to need, and I was able to, just think it through and come up with characters that I ended up really liking. Book 3 in my series, titled Heir of Divinity, it's almost a whole new cast of characters. There are some characters from the other books, but it really focuses on 4 totally brand new protagonists that are doing things separately. And I had no backstory for any of them other than the things they were going to be doing. But I didn't know these characters at all. So I didn't have really a trope or a stereotype to pull from. I didn't really have new characters with backstories, and that's really not my method. I don't usually create giant backstories with unnecessary information. So I was kind of stuck in a pickle, and I didn't know what to do. This is a situation I had never come against. I usually just create a character, put them in the story, everything's fine. But I needed 4 interesting, unique characters at once with no real history. So here's what I did. I imagined myself interviewing them, and I had one by one, I opened up like a Word document or whatever it was. I didn't so much ask questions, but you could do this, and let them speak. Let them flow through you. Let them each have a unique voice. At first it felt weird because I had never done anything like that before. But I just tried to imagine, I gave each one kind of a trait, a personality. I knew one thing about all 4 of them is they were all going to have a little bit of an ego. So I kind of looked at how would this person's ego materialize through them, and how would they act with this ego. Like, one is overly egotistic. He's short, he's young, he doesn't have a lot of life experience, but he has a lot of knowledge, and he's kind of like a womanizer. Like, everything's come easy to him, despite the fact that he is so young and so small. He's a short dude, and really he doesn't have a lot on the surface to be egotistical about, other than his intelligence and his education, and his womanizing is an ego thing to him. So I just let him talk. And how would a guy like that talk? Kind of immature, maybe use big words. And I just kind of typed in his voice for about a page and a half, maybe just a page and a quarter. And it started to materialize, like, the way this dude was, and I could start visualizing, I could start figuring him out and see like what his flaws were and what his strengths were. I did that for all 4 characters. To give an example, the one was supposed to be 4 men, basically 4 men. It's in the Middle Ages, like a fantasy setting. in my books, women are kind of equals. It's not quite the way it was in Europe in the Middle Ages, but it's still kind of seen culturally that women should be doing the women, stereotypical stuff, and men make all the decisions and, get the education, do the jobs or whatever. So it's a kind of a background thing that doesn't really so much come to the forefront in the books, is that there is this uh, almost like a sexual revolution almost. I don't want to call it that, but where there is equality, but a lot of women are still uncomfortable accepting that. They don't want to step forward and be the ones because it'll bring a negative attention from the men who still don't buy into this new culture. It's not an issue that's really specifically talked about in the books, but I thought this was a good opportunity to have a female character who had come up in this male kind of dominated, environment where she was very educated, she was very intelligent, but yet she keeps getting passed over for these opportunities. So when she gets these opportunities, she goes at them, and she goes at them mercilessly. And that's kind of, you know, how I based her character. She's got a lot of positives, but she's also got some negatives because of this. She doesn't take a lot of advice, especially from men. And I let her speak for about a page and a half. And I don't want to go through all four of the characters because the story is basically the same. I let the characters speak. So in my mind, it's kind of a middle ground between knowing all the backstory, writing a 30-page biography with all their favorite foods and colors and family history, and the opposite end of the spectrum where you just wing it and just go as what the story needs, and you end up maybe with a bland stereotype as a character or a tropey character. I think this was a good way, and that's why I wanted to share it real quick on this video. If you have to create new characters, especially I had to do 4 at one time that had to be major characters, not just background characters. These were all, try to find their voice. Let them speak, and once they start speaking to you, they'll start saying things that you didn't plan on. I know that's kind of a for scripts too. When you start doing dialogue, once you get into the flow, a lot of times the characters will start saying stuff that you didn't intend. And in a way, that's a good sign. That's a good sign that you're creating a character that now is starting to flow naturally, and you don't need to force things and force the dialogue. Well, in this case, these were books, novels, but the concept was the same. And it's a thing. It's a option that you have. Is just try to picture them like you're sitting in a room with them, interviewing them, and just say, tell me about yourself. And then, I had the one character who was a priest, and he goes and talking about the importance of his religion and how he was young when there was the great flood, and he remembers this and that, and stuff like that was not intended in my original story. But he remembered events from the first story because he would have been a child then. He would have been, 4 or 5 years old. So he remembers some of these things and the effect it had on why he became a priest and why he acts the way he does in this book. And again, these things weren't intended, but just by allowing the character to talk, I learned about his past. I learned about his, his future essentially, because his personality that he developed was going to, affect and inform his future decisions. And I found this to be a highly effective way, and I'm very happy with the way the book and the characters turned out. And I owe probably 90% of that, to be fair, to this method of creating character. All right, well, to wrap it up, I just want to say there is no right or wrong way. We're called right from wrong, but there is no right or wrong way to create a character. And also, some people create characters and then create stories around them. Other people create situations or concepts and then populate it with characters. There's no wrong way. I might do a video on that later, like what comes first, the chicken or the egg, but it's a concept or character. But in reality, there's no wrong way as long as you get to tell the story you want. And so if you want to write out a 30-page biography on all your characters, go for it. Just know the pros and the cons. Same with the opposite end of the spectrum. If you just wing it and you just go with what the story tells you, you may end up with bland characters that seem tropey, stereotypical, or even just forgetful, just not interesting. And that might be the worst thing. And try to find somewhere in the middle, maybe like I did. Try my method, see if it works for you. Just sit down with a blank sheet of paper, with a blank Word document, whatever format or screenplay software, whatever you're using, and just let them speak. Tell me about yourself. And you might be surprised, because I met 4 people that day. I mean, I feel like I met 4 people. And when the time came for me to actually begin the book, it suddenly wasn't as daunting. Like, I knew who these people were. I knew the things that they would say. I know how they would react. And the fact that I purposely designed them under 4 different personalities, 4 different occupations, but one main trait, and that was ego. I kind of looked into their ego and tried to make that their main personality trait that I could develop. And it worked really well for me. Again, I just want to say good luck with your writing. But yeah, seriously, this method worked for me. I highly recommend trying it. If you're writing new characters and you just don't know where to begin, and you don't want to be too tropey, you don't want to be too stereotypical, just give it a shot. And maybe check out one of my other videos, maybe subscribe. I try to post as often as I can when I have something to say. So happy writing. Good luck.